Hi, everybody. I hope this finds you home and warm and enjoying a well-deserved day off on a Monday. I am posting some notes here because I want to make sure you stay on track with your psych studies, even though we might have some weather disruptions. I apologize in advance if you hear lots of little, jingling bells and random noises because our two cats are chasing each other around right now, so you might encounter some of that. I'm just going to spend a few minutes addressing a topic that you actually didn't have any assigned reading on this unit. And what I'm going to post here in Canvas will be accessible throughout this unit, but it's not something I'm going to be able to address in class because of our constraints due to the snow day today. So we're going to get introduced to a topic that you got very vaguely and briefly introduced to way back in Module 2 when you were learning about the different subfields of psychology. One of the subfields that showed up first in that module was industrial organizational psychology, which is often abbreviated IO Psych. The reason that this topic comes up again in this unit is this is a subfield of psychology that does deal a lot quite directly with human motivation, because this is a subfield of psychology that deals with the workplace. So today we're going to be trying to accomplish two things in our brief time together. We're going to hope that at the conclusion of this lesson that you're going to be able to describe what IO Psych is in general and some of its related subfields, which may or may not be new to you. We're also going to apply a couple of concepts that show up a lot in modern IO Psych research that deal with some of the psychological needs that people sometimes meet through their work and through their academic achievement. And those include things like flow, the concept of achievement motivation itself, and grit. So here we go. The schematic that you're looking at, this little hierarchy, I hope will help make sense of this subfield of industrial organizational psychology, because IO Psych is its own subfield that focuses on the application of psychological principles to work. People who are trained as IO psychologists often work in private industry for companies, designing things that might help them in various ways. But there's actually three different related subfields of industrial organizational psychology, one of which we already directly encountered in our sensation and perception unit. So you may or may not remember way back in November learning about how human factor psychologists use what we know about human perception and expectations to design products and systems and even architectural designs to meet human needs. So sometimes these guys are referred to as engineering psychologists because they literally are designing physical products and equipment that people could use without making mistakes. So stuff that's not both ergonomic and efficient to use and less likely to cause problems for us. So we looked at things like well-designed buildings at that time, well-designed products that might reasonably be the work of industrial organizational psychologists. Now, the two other branches of industrial organizational psychology that we've not yet talked about include personnel psychology. As the name implies, personnel is like a human resources department. So this would be the part of a company that's involved in the hiring process and also in doing performance evaluations for people. One key interest for personnel psychologists is how do we make sure that the hiring practices we use and the performance evaluation systems that companies have put in place are fair and free of bias and actually help you recruit and retain the employees who are going to be the best for that company's motives. We're going to spend our time limited and brief time today talking a little bit more about some concepts that relate to this third branch of industrial organizational psych, which is just called organizational psychology. This might reasonably be described as the psychology of management because it involves figuring out what types of management styles best work to motivate employees and have them carry out the company's goals, and how do we foster appropriate employee motivation and engagement. This is something that a lot of workplaces want to achieve, so how do we make sure that our employees that we have are happy and stay at the company long term and contribute their best work to what the company's trying to do. So if you're into business, this is definitely the psychology of business. And in particular, one concept that's received a lot of attention among organizational psychologists and others, like this is also a concept that shows up in positive psychology and other areas. But my favorite thing about this concept is that its name is super short. It's referred to as flow or sometimes flow states. But the last name of the gentleman who wrote about and first described this is amazingly long, and this is not a typo. He's from Eastern Europe. That last name is pronounced Csikszentmihalyi. There will be no spelling test on that later, but Csikszentmihalyi's work essentially focused on this unique state of being that people enter into when they're completely concentrating on a task that is challenging and engaging. And it has some typical features to it. For example, when people enter into flow states, they often kind of don't notice that time is passing, and they might not be attending as much to their own personal feelings and needs because they're so caught up in a task. So this is something that a lot of my students have experienced at different points in their lives, but it's the kind of thing that we experience when we get so caught up in doing something that we just completely lose track of time, but it's in a good way. It tends to be something that feels very simultaneously energizing and relaxing to people. A lot of people will report going into flow states when they're practicing a piece of music that they really enjoy, but that is challenging. People might be getting into flow states if they're being optimally challenged even in a video game. Even though that's quite passive, people might be bringing their best skills and attention to complete that, and it's a fun challenge. So you might look up at the clock and realize, oh my goodness, 3 hours has gone by and I didn't even notice that. For me, I tend to get involved in flow states when I'm designing and preparing lessons because that it's challenging. It forces me to bring what I know about the content together with what I know about learning and the specific students that are in front of me. So I actually really like those kinds of planning and design tasks. It harnesses a lot of creativity for me. I also experience these things while I'm sewing because I like to sew and quilt and stuff. So later today, hopefully when I get done with some of this lesson stuff, I can actually sneak away to the sewing room and experience some flow states. We'll just let the hours pass by while I listen to podcasts and maybe sew some quilt blocks with animal faces or something. So another concept that is central to industrial organizational psych is the notion of achievement motivation. This has been studied by a couple different researchers, David McClelland being one of them. But achievement motivation is this idea that perhaps people have varying needs for achievement. And one thing that might predict their performance on almost any type of skill that they might encounter is how much they have this demand or desire for accomplishing significant things, working to attain a high standard, so getting good at stuff. Sometimes that shows up in forms of like achieving control or maybe dominance in a workplace, if you're looking to, for example, run the company or something. But people do vary to a considerable degree in how much they express this need. And it's been studied in different ways. One way researchers have assessed it is by giving people a task to do where they get to decide for themselves what the level of difficulty is. So giving people like a ring toss game where they have to toss different colorful rings around a peg, but they can choose how far away from the target they stand. People with a high desire for achievement motivation or high need for it tend to find the distance that's challenging to them and work from there, rather than just to do it and get it done with in the easiest way possible. So someone with low achievement motivation needs might just walk over to the peg, drop all the rings on top of the peg and do nothing more. People with achievement motivation try and challenge themselves. They try and get better. So they'll try and find the furthest distance back from which they can toss the rings. And this is certainly something that both of these concepts actually apply a lot to school. People who have a high need for achievement motivations are the exact type of student that tend to land themselves in my class. They tend to be trying to challenge themselves, trying to push their own skills. We saw that as we looked at the different statements about why people even took the class last week. We also have opportunities within the context of this class when people get really into their studying. Sometimes at those study sessions, even though it's challenging, people are working through it, and we get to the end, and holy cow, 2 hours or more has gone by, and people are into it. If you're able to achieve a flow state while you're studying or engaging with a particular area of content, you're likely to enjoy it and to do better. If you have high levels of achievement motivation, you'll also spend more time trying to get better because that matters to you. Now, the last concept that I'll introduce is one that you may have heard of in other contexts. It's been interesting, and there's been some controversy back and forth about it in the past few years in the psychology research. But Angela Duckworth, who you see pictured here on the screen, has made kind of a name for herself by identifying, measuring, and researching a component of achievement motivation known as grit. This is a little bit different than just the concept of pure achievement motivation as it is. Achievement motivation is kind of just a desire for attainment and getting better at a particular skill. Duckworth defines grit as passion and perseverance in the pursuit of long-term goals. And she thinks this is actually maybe a better predictor of performance in school and in work than many other qualities, including maybe achievement motivation itself. Because the idea of it is that people with a high degree of grit don't give up when the going gets tough, that they keep persisting even through difficult tasks, knowing that that persistence is going to pay off. And there is some evidence that this is the case. I mean, if you take two individuals, just like a thought exercise here, two individuals who both have the same level of academic intelligence, but one encounters a real setback in the form of a low quiz and decides to give up after that. They take a challenging course. The first quiz is really bad. So the person who's low in grit might decide to drop the course or pursue something different that they could maybe more easily master. Someone with a high degree of grit may encounter that very same difficulty. So difficult class, difficult first quiz that doesn't go how you want, but the person with grit is going to dig in, go get help, review what they missed, and know that they're going to do better the next time with the hard work that they put in. We all do face obstacles in life, and perhaps it's not so much the skills that we bring to bear when we encounter those obstacles, but the choices that we make when we do face them. Do we keep going? Do we use our hard work and our skill to persist through that difficulty, or do we give up and change directions? I mean, there is a lot. I think there's a lot to be said for that concept. Now, okay, that being said, there have been challenges to this notion of grit because some people think we're actually measuring other pre-existing psychological constructs. Like some people would tell you that this is just another way of framing a personality trait that's already been identified and researched a lot called conscientiousness. And whether or not grit can be taught is also somewhat up in the air at this point. Is this a skill that people can learn and to make it part of their being so that they can overcome difficulties if they maybe hadn't been able to do that in the past, which is interesting to think about. Okay, so I'll let you move on to the next learning task, which you'll find posted in Canvas. I would like you to watch through this brief RSA Animate video that I think is a perfect frosting on the cake of the IO Psych research, because it takes us full circle with the motivation theory from this unit. On our very first day, we learned about incentives and how those have been used to understand human motivation, but some of the research coming out of modern industrial organizational psych suggests that incentives definitely have their limitations, and you get to watch a cute video about why that's so. So enjoy, and enjoy the rest of your snow day. I'll be checking to see how you do on those Socrative questions to see how this is sinking in for people.